Thank you.
Morning.
Marvelous.
Good morning. You can hear me? Great. The next speaker, most of you know, has been around the Bailey teachings since her infancy. She brings practicality and joy to her many roles in life: daughter, sister, wife, mother, ambassador of love. And she's special to me for two reasons. Last year, during a particularly trying time, she had the wisdom to look into my eyes and say, "Eva, breathe." And the other reason that I really, really cherish her is because her infectious delight in poetry opened that door to me, and I now have more poetry books next to my bed than any woman really deserves, but I love it. She has written a poetry book, which is in the bookstore, available to all. Also, did I mention that her talks are a treat? So please enjoy Heidi Robbins.
Thank you, Eva. When it was done, when words were spoken that cannot be unsaid, the silence kissed my eyes and mouth and whispered into the cave of my heart. All my life I'd heard the joyous music in a village just around the bend. And though the music was wild and free and insistent, and though my heart stirred from the strains I could dimly hear, I never chose to go. There was work to be done, after all. But after all, when there was nothing left to do but walk in the last blazes of the sun from all that was familiar, I opened my eyes, freshly kissed, and in wordless wonder followed this beckoning, ceaseless beauty home. That is a poem called Home that I wrote just a few months ago. And it came out of holding a question or feeling a vow within myself to walk away from what was familiar and to walk towards something that was huge and unknown. And it's so interesting when we ask these questions or we commit to these vows. It's so interesting how silence kisses our eyes and our mouth and whispers into the cave of our heart so that we can actually witness, so that we can actually receive what we want to receive. And for me, in a way, what I was looking for is a greater availability to, let's say, this being of beauty. And, I deeply relate to there was work to be done after all. I have Saturn conjunct the sun, right? There was work to be done after all. But after all, when there was nothing left to do, right? There comes a moment in our lives, and I think there are probably many moments, but for me, there came a moment this year where I said, after all, I'm done with the familiar. Yeah, I'm going to be steeped in it. Yes, I'm a mother and a wife, and as we all have these roles, but done with that. On to something that was more in communion with this being of beauty. So, this talk is entitled A Call to Beauty, the Subtle Art of Invocation. And when I think of a call to beauty, I have an image of someone at the top of a mountain peak with a French horn, or one of those, what are they called? The long, call to beauty. I have that image of this this not particularly subtle energy around beauty, right? And but it's a claiming of it. It's a request. It's a celebration of it. And I also think of Interlochen Arts Camp, which my father brought up, in the first talk as we opened the conference. And at the back of Kresge Auditorium is that sign that says, dedicated to the promotion of world friendship through the universal language of the arts. And I went to Interlochen for 11 summers. And I would gather with 2,000 campers. And I was also, I taught there for many summers too, but I would gather with the campers and we would sound the call, it was called. We would say, oh, sound the call to dear old Interlochen, land of the stately pine, da-da-da-da, where small or not. Hands and loyal ever greet you, faithful to old lang syne. Old friends you'll greet, new ones you'll meet, are welcome you'll ever find. So sound the call to dear old Interlochen, shrine of the muse divine. I should not have sung that, but I did. Okay, so Shrine of the Muse Divine, and that's what it was. It was the Shrine of the Muse Divine. I would walk outside at 6 in the morning, and there would be a gorgeous opera singer in a practice cap, and someone playing the cello, someone practicing Shakespeare. I would have to have a bag on my head to deny the beauty that was everywhere. And then I'd have to walk through like this. But so sometimes in our lives we have these opportunities where we just have to breathe it in. We just have to say, oh my gosh, look, it's beautiful, and I get to receive it. And so, and actually our responsibility in that moment is to celebrate it. If someone's coming towards you and they are all radiance and light, you better tell them. At least, that's been my practice. We're pierced by beauty, to be stunned by beauty, instead of go, oh, well, she's looking very pretty, right? It's like celebrate it, and breathe it in. So the call to beauty for me has a just great sense of celebration and a kind of open your eyes and take it in. The subtle art of invocation is something different, because it's subtler. And I think that what was happening for me this year was this profound desire to get a little subtler. And I knew what I needed to do. I was feeling a bit gray, really, I think, going through my day, packing the lunches, and, we all have those moments, right? So I knew I had to take myself time out of time. I knew I had to get away, which actually required courage for me, because that sense of responsibility to take myself away from children, husband, whatever, was okay, no, I've got to do this. That's all. Got to do it. So I Googled Ojai retreats. I found Krishnamurti's Pepper Tree Retreat. Which I was delighted by, because I don't know if you know, but he hosted so many artists. There's the Stravinsky Suite, there's the John Lennon room, there's the Huxley room, there's the Annie Besant room, So I was I really thought, oh, that would be lovely, because I want to go there and work. Of course, even then I was I need time out of time so I can do my work that I am apparently passionate about. So I was very proud of myself. I got in the car, I drove away. I was I need this, I need something, I need communion, I need to. But really I was just driving there to have some time by myself to work. So I got there, I worked. I got there at 3 in the afternoon. I wrote astrology. I had in my mind that I have to write astrology. I have to write this astrology book, workbook, something. And I worked till 11 o'clock at night, and I woke up the next morning, and I worked some more, and then I went outside. I was oh, it's pretty here. And I went back and I worked some more. But finally, I was I can't work anymore. I've written 30 pages. And I went outside with my notebook, and I just sat in the field that was there, this beautiful field. And I sat there, and I took a breath, and I was oh. And I softened just a little bit. And I found myself writing a poem, and I hadn't written a poem in 7 or 8 years. And in fact, this isn't the poem, but this was a poem that I wrote shortly after that. And I found myself writing a poem, and let me just share this with you. It's called The Kiss of Sky. Because you will see as the poem begins, this is where I was sitting. I sit in a rusty white chair at the center of a grassy field. The green lushness of mountain before me cuts into unceasing blue. I breathe to stand with the row of trees that line the highest ridge. We open ourselves to light's kiss, unfurling to receive the gift of sky. Here I see why we must fall to our knees in our greatest moments of victory. At the summit, there are no words to name the infinite. All we achieve must melt into awe. Here, at the threshold of ancient earth and boundless sky, we have this, our tender body, our breath, our beating heart, and our yearning, our deepest yearning to be touched by unfathomable, astonishing love. And what happened when I wrote that poem is there was a little veil that opened and the yearning entered. The yearning to be touched by the being of beauty, the yearning to be touched by unfathomable love, and the recognition that in order to do so, I had to breathe. But it was just a little glimpse, right? It was a little glimpse. And then I went back to work. It's amazing how much you have to be like soft. You have to be, So I went home. I was like, oh, that was really good. I worked really hard. I got a lot done. And promptly lost everything that I had written. My computer crashed. Even though my father's given me 5 backup, whatever they're called, modems, I had backed up none of it. So I sobbed for 10 minutes, held a dinner party, and then got on with it. And I recognized that I suddenly said, but I have something. I have the poems. And I was like, thank God I have the poems. But even then I said, I better book another time to go away because I have to write again. I have to get this back in. So I did. I booked another 2 days away for like 6 weeks from then because it was the only solace that I could have. But before I went and I talked with a woman, a dear friend, a dear teacher who said to me, well, I'll say that she asked me a question about my purpose. That at first I was like, are you kidding? I don't even want to hear you. And she asked me that question, and she said, I want you to hold that during your time away. And I said, maybe. And then she said, and I would also like you to just please organically let your time away unfold. Just please soften a bit and breathe and see what you need to do. Do you need to take a nap? Do you want to go into town and have a chai? Do you want to see a movie? And I was like, no. I have all this work, right? But I listened. I've known enough from her that I just listen and I digest and I breathe and I go away. And sure enough, as I was driving to Ojai again, as the familiar was falling off of me, I said, okay, I trust her, and I'm going to try this experiment. So in a way, that beginning of home, when it was done, when words were spoken that cannot be unsaid, that was the question, that was the vow to myself. And you know what? I'll just tell you what it was. I was going to be all secret about it, but somehow it feels right. You're like, what was wow? In fact, when I wrote that first poem, I got the home poem. I got so many calls from friends, like, "Are you okay? Is your marriage okay? Are you going to leave? Are you joining a commune?" But in fact, if there's something very simple about these questions, and for me, it was actually okay. I have been for many years now doing this thing. I have been an astrologer, and yes, I've been weaving all these things in that make it my own. But I was really asking myself the question, do you want to continue to practice astrology? Is this really what you're meant to do? Which is a terrifying task in midlife. It's like, I don't want to be a novice again, or or I don't want to. But it was a terrifying question, but it was an exhilarating question, and it allowed me to soften enough to make myself available to something else. So I was asking myself that question, and like this, right? So I was asking myself that question, and I was also insisting on allowing myself to do what I needed to do to feel back in my body and to feel available. Okay? So I got there and I took a nap and I ate some good food, and, I did these things that allow us to suddenly go, oh, and it made a huge difference. And what did I do? The first thing that I did in terms of my work is I went out into my field, which was now starting to be my work. Right? I went into my field with my notebook and I just breathed and I sat still enough to a road runner came by me. I was like, what is that? I was like, what is that? And I just, and it's so perfect as an Aries to have a road runner come by you. But I was like, all still, and he zipped off. But anyway, yeah. So I went to my field, and I'll share another poem with you that came out of one of my field moments. It's called I Who Love Mountains and All They Signify. Do we like mountains here? I think so. Okay. I who love mountains and all they signify find sanctuary in valleys where quiet truths are echoed back off mountainsides. I ask a question, however muddled or unclear, and reflection careens off sides of earth, allowing my breath to steady and body to calm. Here, closer to the beat of the heart of the earth, I hear the essential. I who love mountains and all they signify choose here to lay the earth of my body on the body of the earth. And only in this deep surrender is a scent of the great ascent yet to come. This is a lesson I've been trying to learn my whole life. Do you know? This surrender is not giving up, friends. We know that, right? And it is about making oneself, I keep on doing this, but making oneself available, right, to something, to the beat of the heart of the earth, to nourish us, to infuse us, so that we can truly align with what our purpose is. And my question, am I meant to practice astrology, whatever, I could say, oh yes, I am, and bring it back in and be all infused with my new purpose. But I have to ask the question. I have to render myself available to it. So I was learning, by the way, I went back to Ojai 5 times this year. So I was feeling a little bit indulgent, but I also knew that I returned, full of life and full of love. But so I was learning that in order to have a conversation with the vastness, to have a conversation with the being of beauty, the being of goodness, the being of truth, look, I had to take a breath. I had to soften. I had to surrender. I had to lay down all the best laid plans and be present, yeah? So this subtle invocation of beauty has so much to do with even if it appears that something gray or ugly or cloudy is coming at you or is not what one would hope it would be, if we stay present to any seed, any glimmer of something inside of that, and the only way we can stay present to that is to soften, is to breathe, and then is to align with that. Now look, it sounds idyllic, it sounds idyllic to take yourself out of life, right, and to go off, and then there you can have these ecstatic experiences. But this, the book I wrote is called Sanctuary, because I was having an experience of sanctuary, a sacred place, but I was also asking myself the question, how do I become sanctuary? How do I carry sanctuary within me so that at any moment, I can align with that vastness. Do you know, there's this beautiful poem, and I don't know it well, but it's by Yeats, and he speaks of being in a coffee shop, and it's called My 50th Year, and he speaks of being in a coffee shop, and he says, in 20 moments more or less, I could bless and I could be blessed. You know, those heightened moments where you're just available. And it was in a coffee shop in the middle of London. But he has this ecstatic experience. But here's the point. There are times when we are just wretchedly sad and wretchedly unavailable, and we're so closed off, and we're so caught up in the personality drama. And you know what? It's very important to name the wretchedness. I'm all about naming the wretchedness, because we have to name the wretchedness to get to this place of sanctuary and ecstatic availability at any moment. Yeah? So, I just want to share with you a poem that I wrote several years before, in fact 7 years before, because it had been a long time since I wrote any poetry, and I want to share that with you because it's a contrast, okay? So far we're like, right? But this is a contrast, and it's a step along the way. Enough. It's called To Begin. To begin, I am sad. It is a small sorrow in a great world, but fills this moment entirely. Do not tell a soul. This sadness can be carried quietly. I will cry as I walk to the dry cleaners, carrying my favorite, hopelessly stained dress. I am good at my life, can't you tell? I am pleasant. You are pleased. No one need know I sit stunned on the couch for hours. I want to strip, smear my face, open my mouth, pour sweet wine too much over my face, my breasts, down my throat. I want to dance for leering men, turn my back, leave them starving. I want to be too much, not enough, never just right. I want to undo any perfect peace. I want to unravel my life. I want to uproot the lily. I want to break something perfect. I do not wish to sit on the couch so far away from any life I meant to live. I am stuck in sad time where everything is just out of reach. I'm not blind. Even here, I see there are sweet fields of red blood poppies. Even here, there are hot springs bubbling up from the earth. I will roll in that blushing quilt. I will soak in that lapping heat. But first, I will stand. I will walk to the dry cleaners, pick up my dress. It will still be stained. I will hold it high so it does not drag on the long walk home. And it is a long walk home. And it's interesting, the first poem, I am also headed home from all that is unfamiliar. But this is a walk through the familiar and through naming the wretchedness and choosing to, when we name it, we diffuse it. When we name something, I think we either give it power or we let the air out of it, right? So there's something about naming it instead of like squashing it down, right? So in this poem, I was definitely in the space of, I remember that as a turning point. Once I had named it, I was like, oh, I was relieved, I was unburdened. So important to name our wretchedness on the way to that availability, because then our heart grows lighter, and then it grows softer, and then it grows more available. Yeah. So my time in Ojai was such a deep learning experience about how to soften and about how to wake up to when I'm not, to the beauty around me. Do you know, it's one thing, I said earlier, like you could, if I had a bag over my head, then perhaps walking through Interlock and there's no way that the beauty still wouldn't get to me. Well, we can walk through the most beautiful celebratory beauty and we can have a bag over our head, So we have to teach ourselves to be present to every touch, every sweetness, every piercing. It says beauty can pierce one like a pain. Who says that? It's such a beautiful image. Beauty can pierce one like a pain, but it can only pierce one like a pain if your chest is open and you are naked to be touched. Yeah. So one thing that I started to do for myself was to sort of check in rhythmically about whether I was available in that way. And one way, of course, that I check in is to breathe. And one way that I check in is to see the parts of our bodies that we hold in great crinkledom. And, so for me, this place, I just hold tremendous, so one way to check if I'm available is even to just, to check with my physical body. And this tells me a lot. I love you, right? Yeah. But I wrote a poem for myself, and as an invitation to myself, and I would offer it to you as an invitation, as a rhythmic check-in. And it's so simple. And maybe it feels like, oh, it's too simple. But there's something about a rhythmic questioning that, like the breath, that can really change you. So it's called offering. And now, dear one, are you love? Or has something settled in that wants to be burned out with the heart's blaze? This inventory is not to jar, but rhythmically offer the threshold of freedom. Dear one, are you love? Our every full breath invites softening, making room for the whispered secret of presence. And presence, dear one, is only love. And you are in it, and you are of it. Take a breath. And now, so just as I was several years ago encouraging everyone to walk around the conference and greet one another with hello, love, you might now say, dear one, are you love? Are you love? And this, I actually, as I wrote it at first, I was like, oh, this is so, I don't know how to describe it. I felt like it had too much, and dear one, are you love? Kind of, but I realized it was like, no, I am the dear one. I am the dear one. Dear one, are you love? Yes, I am. So that is a practice, and I think we can answer it all the more as we take our breaths, And in this moment, I just have to say that, many of you know that Sophia Diaz is going to perform tonight, and I feel so deeply that so much of my poetry and so many of my words have come from her open heart and open body and her teaching. And as I speak, I can, I feel, I hope we all have this experience, where our teachers just move through us and we say, oh, I'm so blessed. I am so blessed. And that's what I came out of, my time in Ojai with such gratitude. It was a totally radical experience of gratitude that I was getting to commune with a vastness, and that I was claiming it for myself, and that I was saying no, yes to the familiar, and no to the familiar. yes to the form and no to the form. So I took many walks in Ojai, and I want to share one last poem with you. But I just want to tell you a little bit about it, because it feels to me like it was the last poem that I wrote in Ojai, and it was relatively recently. Do you know? So I'm taking you up to this very last moment. Do you know? And even this book, you know, up a week and a half ago, my mother and I were sewing the bindings with wax thread. You know, so it feels very immediate to me. But I took many walks, and the walks would always start out, you know, a little bit like all the inventory of the body and the exhaustion, and, you know, or at least just listening. I guess these walks were profound times of listening. Who is it that said angels whisper to a man who walks, right? So it took me a while to start to listen. But I would take these long walks back and forth, and I would bring my iPhone and talk into my iPhone about ideas that I was having, so that I could later write them down. But I always returned from these walks deeply touched and deeply, again, grateful. And this particular walk, it was early in the morning. I was feeling a little bit crinkly, and I can't remember why exactly. Because I was having such a good time, but you know, even in the midst of this beauty, right, we can still close. So I was a little bit uncomfortable walking along, and then I had this experience, which I'll share in the poem, which just reminded me, you know, and when I had the experience, I thought, oh God, I would love to write a poem about that, but I can't. I don't know, I just immediately had this feeling that I couldn't do it, and I carried it in my heart, and I carried it in my heart until the very last moment that I was there, and I went out to my field, and I brought my notebook, and I scrawled it out in just like 20 minutes it came out, you know. But for me now, I can feel it as this profound touchstone for the coming months, you know, for the coming years, because this has to do with how we affect one another. How we affect one another. So I think I'm actually going to leave you with this poem. It's called Morning Walk. The morning was crisp. Frost covered the oranges. The birds were cold and talked amongst themselves. I walked down a stretch of road looking for patches of sun. My hands were plunged in pockets and my brow crinkled with morning plans. She rode toward me on an old bike, weaving back and forth to make the incline easier. Her hair was white and flowing, and her face flushed like a child who had come to report her latest adventure. Her face open, fresh, smooth, like a saint, really, who carried only love. At any moment, she would surely laugh, and even with the effort of the climb, delight rippled in her wake. When our eyes met, without flinch or hesitation, she said breathlessly, "Wait till you see the snow." She might have said, "Wait till you see beauty everywhere. Wait till you know the secret of all things. Wait till you know you are love." But she said what she did and rode by, her story told, her message delivered. I turned to look at the capped peaks in the distance and saw the beauty of a mountain rarely covered in winter, while my body was melting into spring. Tears were streaming down my face, a subtle hardness around my heart dissolving. I flung open my arms and gathered her goodness to my chest while my body was bursting into spring. "Wait till you see the snow," I whispered. "Wait till you see it." Her unabashed love, careening, ricocheting through my now vast heart. Thank you so much.